Welcome, everyone, to episode 11 of Fraud Fact Friday. This is, in fact, David Weaver. I may look a little bit different than the guy in the banner at the bottom just now. I haven't had a haircut since March 3rd. I'm also in a different setting. Looks very different than the last 10 episodes, but you are here at the right spot for Fraud Fact Friday live, and I am here today with Mark Anderson. And Mark is the Director of Training and Development at Anderson Investigative Associates, and he has 30 years of experience as an investigator. And his LinkedIn tagline is bringing interview training that maximizes the quantity and quality of results obtained. Mark, I'm going to start with what has turned into somewhat of a loaded question in recent days, in recent weeks. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Good.
I feel like I'm getting out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's nice. To be honest, Mark, I'm trying something new. We're broadcasting to an event. I'm hoping to get some feedback of some kind and some form of comment from someone to show that this is working on LinkedIn. If it is not, it's being recorded and we're going to share with everyone afterwards, but everything looks fine on my end. Anybody who is watching, feel free to comment. I'm still here working on trying to pull them up on my phone. But in the meantime, we are going to start per usual with our Fraud Fact Friday Fast Facts. It is an icebreaker that I like to do with my guests to kind of just get the conversation going, to, let the viewers know about the guest more beyond the topic at hand, which is the art of the interview. Don't be nervous, Mark. The questions are not that hard. But I'm going to start, if you are okay with that. You have 30 seconds to answer 5 either-or questions.
Okay.
Don't think too much about it.
You don't have to worry about
that. And I will just go ahead and begin. So, and I have a makeshift clock that I always use, so we'll do that now. The 30 seconds you'll be able to see. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Burger or pizza?
Pizza.
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Night owl.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee all day long.
If you could only use one, LinkedIn or Facebook? Be careful.
LinkedIn.
All right. Who is more effective in an interview, the good cop or the bad cop?
The good cop. Okay.
We made it. I always like to have the last question tie into a little bit of our topic that we're going to be discussing today. And I'm hoping, for some reason, I'm not able to pull up the comments. I saw we have a couple. I'm working on that. So thank you for commenting. Anybody who has commented, I saw there was one. But I will work on pulling those up here in a minute. But coffee all day. That's I was a little bit mean about the LinkedIn, Facebook, because I know you have a very good, strong Facebook presence as well, right?
Not as strong as LinkedIn.
Okay. So yeah, and then we'll get to the good cop, bad cop discussion in a minute. But I'd like to give you a chance, of course, to introduce yourself and tell the audience about your background and how you got involved in the fraud fighting space.
Okay, we'll try to keep it short because, as you said, it's over 30 years.
Right.
As David said, I'm the director of training for Anderson Investigative Associates, and we started this company about 6 years ago when I retired from the federal government, where I was a program manager, instructor, and senior special agent with the U.S. Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General. I was assigned down to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, which is in Glencoe, Georgia, where they train all federal special agents working in the behavioral science section. So that's kind of how I got into the intellectual side of the interviewing stuff, in addition to spending 30 years in the field. I started out, I have 2 degrees in chemistry. I'm a forensic chemist by training, and worked in a forensic lab for the first couple of years and found out that those people were weird and I was a different kind of weird. So I used my science background to get into the FBI, worked for them for several years as an agent. And then I left the Bureau, went to New York State to the Office of the Inspector General, which is probably where I really got into the fraud space and the white collar crime space. Worked for them for several years as a deputy inspector general. And then I left the state and went back to the federal government and went to work for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And then after that, went to DOJ, OIG, and worked in the field for them for several years before I went down and started teaching. So kind of diverse background as far as the types of crimes that I've investigated. And I've done both sides as far as administrative and criminal. And then also when I was in New York State, I was also director of internal audit. So I ran an audit shop along with the investigation shop in one of the agencies I was in. So kind of diverse background. And when I left the federal government, I thought, what am I going to do? I love this interviewing space. To me, the best part of our job is interviewing. It isn't doing timesheets. It's not doing spreadsheets. It's getting in the room and having that dialogue with somebody, getting them to tell you something they have no intention of telling you. So
that's an art. That's an art for sure.
So when I left and started this company, that's what we do. We travel around the country and teach interviewing, interrogation, public corruption, investigative planning, anything you can think of on that investigation and audit side, and predominantly to the white collar crime fraud community.
Excellent. That is a expansive background with a lot of experience, and I'm very much looking forward to getting into this with you. So we are, it is working. Fantastic news. It's working, and you need a haircut from Todd Wolf to me. Thank you, Todd.
Well, my wife cut mine this week, so
perfect.
I was looking pretty shaggy, and I didn't out-shag you.
Working great. Looking forward to this. So Stanley, working great, and Michael Skiba says looking forward to this, gentlemen. So we are online. I'm able to see comments now, and yeah, we will go from there. So first question, I wanted to get some definitions out of the way. We're going to jump in if that's okay for you.
Absolutely.
Interview and interrogation. That was the first thing I thought when we were talking in advance about the topic we can cover. What are the key differences between these two terms, and when is maybe one better than the other?
Okay. I get into this all the time. There was a period of time where we couldn't use the term interrogation in the federal government because of the association of interrogation with some sort of like hostile techniques, you know, waterboarding, rubber hosing, phone books, all the rest. So they kind of skirted away from that term. I address this in almost every class because especially in audit classes say, well, we don't do interrogations. So we're going to go with my definition of it, which comes from, you know, several of the people that I follow and people that I deal with, because remember, we're talking about a non-confrontational interview technique. We're not talking about a direct confrontational technique. So to me, here's the difference. And when we look at the difference, the way I'm going to describe it, then we all do interrogations. You're a parent, you got daughters. At some point, you'll be interrogating your children. I have 5, and I've interrogated all of them several times. So here's the difference as I see it. An interview is any opportunity you have where you go in to sit down to talk to somebody, and you're going to ask them some questions, and they're going to provide you some answers. And interrogation, and this comes from, I steal this stuff, and I'll tell you who it's coming from, because he's a great guy, Don Rabin, who's an interviewing instructor here in the States. He's done a lot of work with the ACFE and other organizations. This is out of one of his books, and I love it. You have two places people sit when they come into the interview. They either sit in the willing chair or they sit in the unwilling chair.
Hmm.
In interviews, when you go in and see somebody, if I'm interviewing David and David's in the willing chair, I only have to go in and talk to him, establish some rapport and ask him some questions, and he's going to give me the answers because he wants to help me. The
Yeah.
other option is if David comes in and sits in the unwilling chair because he's concerned about what I'm going to ask him. He's got exposure. His friend has exposure. His company has exposure. And so he has this confliction in his mind as to how he's going to answer questions. And interrogation is when I have to move David from the unwilling chair to the willing chair.
Hmm.
That to me is an interrogation. An interview is when you're sitting there already in the willing chair, and all you have to do is go establish some rapport and ask the questions. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
So
Thank you.
Using that definition, you have to understand the techniques employed are not any different. So I'm not going to yell at you because you're in the unwilling chair.
Yeah.
I'm not going to treat you nicely because you're in the willing chair. I'm going to treat you the same way no matter which chair you are, because that's going to raise my chance of moving you from the unwilling chair to the willing chair.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you. And I want to pick up a topic that you mentioned now, and something that I saw while researching for this interview. You stress the importance of building rapport. You mentioned it just now with your interview partners. What would you say? I guess it depends again on what chair your interview partner is sitting in, as you just mentioned, but what's the quickest and most efficient way to accomplish this, to build rapport?
I think that, and believe me, people say, well, how long should rapport take? My answer to that is rapport takes as long as it takes. It depends on where that person's sitting. It depends on who that person is. It depends on how good you're at establishing it. From my standpoint, probably the easiest way, you got to realize that the importance of rapport is to establish some commonality with the person you're talking to. So you got to find those places where you can establish commonality. That sometimes means you have to reveal some stuff about yourself. Mm-hmm. So I think the easiest definition, to keep it short, you remember the movie Shrek, where he's talking about how complicated things are and peeling away layers of the onion. To get to know who somebody is. That's what we have to do in rapport. We have to peel away and drill down through it. So the rapport we talk about, we see it in 3 phases. We see it as a casual rapport, a close rapport, and then the third would be an intimate rapport. We want to be drilling down toward that intimate rapport, because that's where that person looks at you and says, oh, he's like me. I can identify with him. I can share with him.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So rapport is one aspect of having a successful interview, getting the information, qualitative, quantitative, that you need. In one of your videos that I saw, you cited a study that found that less than 10% of all interviews have adequate planning associated with them. How would you define adequate planning for an interview?
This is great. These questions are great. I have like 3 minutes to answer a question that I teach a 2-hour class on, right?
I mean, don't worry too much about the time. If we go over, I know I told you 20, 25, 30 minutes max, but listen, I mean, if we're having a good conversation, we can go really as long as we want. But yeah, so I mean, just how does one plan then for a successful interview?
I think the tough thing, in these studies are all in the white collar crime fraud arena, and they're coming from Western Europe and the United States, and they're looking at individuals that are doing the type of investigations that are in that white collar crime fraud space. Very interesting studies, and the study that says less than 10%. The problem is we know where to go. We know when we're supposed to go there. We know who we're taking. We generally take along what we're supposed to ask questions about. But really where we haven't put in the time is knowing the person we're going to see. Because, and it couples right in with the rapport issue that we just dealt with. The more I know about you before I sit down with you, the higher the probability I have of establishing relationship with you.
Yeah.
So how do I know about you? I know about you by looking at things like Facebook, by looking at social media, by talking to your friends, by talking to your supervisors. We don't do those soft issues enough to be ready to go into the interview.
Mm.
And so we need to do those more. So when we talk about planning being less than 10% have adequate planning, if you look at those studies, it also says less than 10% of interviews have adequate rapport.
Ah.
So the statistics are almost identical on both of those. And if you think about it, if I haven't done the planning, then how much do I know about you in order to establish the rapport? We go in and say, "Oh, it's a nice day. You know, what's your favorite sports team?"
The weather's always a good spot to start.
But that doesn't, unless we
No.
drill down, that doesn't establish relationship. It
Yeah.
just means we both like sunny days.
Right. Right. It's a very superficial level of the onion, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely the casual rapport. That was what you'd say to somebody in the grocery store once you get to go back.
Right. Right. So I saw, now let's cover this issue that I talked about in the opening with the fraud fact, the fast facts, whatever it's called. A lot of F's. It's hard to say. Fraud fact Friday, fast facts.
Yep.
I mentioned the good cop bad cop thing because one of the first things that came to mind when we said interviewing people, trying to get them to confess or asking them questions. Maybe they were a witness. You think of, for me at least, in the movies or the crime shows, when detectives are trying to get that suspect to admit something, they have this good cop bad cop thing. It's often portrayed. And what's the thinking behind the strategy, and is it even used in real life, let's say? Or I mean,
yeah, great question. You know, I got down to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center when I started working there. I was lucky to be put on a team that developed an advanced interviewing course for nationwide deployment. And when we started looking at what we were going to present, there was stuff in the literature in the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center that was being trained to federal agents about good cop, bad cop. And,
okay.
and so it is definitely something that's out there. It's definitely something that some people teach. I absolutely don't teach it. I teach good cop, because think about it in your own life. I mean, I'll go back to the old thing. You get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. You know, think about it in your own life. Somebody who you work for goes off on you, has a fit on you about something. Then they come to you the next day and they want to be friends with you. How's that work out for them? You know, just think about it from the standpoint of what you expect. I mean, you can go back to the biblical concept of, you know, treat others as you want to be treated. Yeah. So I'm going to state now, do I end up as a bad cop sometimes? Yes. And usually it's when I haven't planned adequately, when I haven't done adequate rapport, when I've asked bad questions, when I haven't handled denials. It's usually my fault that I end up in that space. And I do the bad cop as the last resort. Mm-hmm. So my concept is good cop all day long. If you and I are sitting down and interviewing somebody, we're going to both establish rapport with that person. And then based on that rapport, we're going to have an idea who has the greatest connection, the greatest commonality, the greatest connectivity. And that person's going to do the interview because they're going to have a more effective opportunity to get the best quality and quantity of information. Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
So, perfect. So cop shows make me crazy. When they do that. So watch, go back to, and here are some of the younger people on here. You're going to have to look this up, Google this, NYPD Blue. David, you're going to have to Google it, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was
I know it. I know it.
Simplewitz?
I know it, but I was too young to watch it.
Okay. I have some clips that I use in classes. Simplewitz was the worst, you know, walk in, throw a piece of paper down, a pad down and said, you know, give me your statement. You know, terrible way to do statements. So there's a lot of stuff on there. You just look and say, oh man, that doesn't work. And but there's a lot of cops out there that follow that stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, true for Hollywood in general. Sometimes people think things will work out the way that they do on the big screen, but it's often different.
Yep.
So I have to address a question because now it's the second time something in this direction has gone through. Thank you very much, Deborah, in advance, who sent her question to me on a message on LinkedIn, and now Roland is asking a similar question. So I'll read. So from Deborah came, I would like to hear of any tips in conducting virtual interviews in these current times. And following on that, from Roland, how can we transfer the experience from personal face-to-face interviews to the virtual world? Reading people is possible in personal interviews, but becomes difficult in the virtual world, or even more difficult on the phone. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the questions go in the same direction.
Oh, Olan just answered the question for us.
R-O-L-A-N-D, Roland.
Roland. He covered the a question and an answer all in one, I think, there. It's a great question, and it is so timely. I've actually received 2 emails this week asking me to address that for people. Yeah. And I'm being asked much more for blogs and information I've written on telephone interviewing and virtual video interviewing and stuff like that. Yeah. We're heading in that direction long before the pandemic came up. And we're heading in that direction because it saves time and it saves money not to put people out in the field. Does it work? It works in some cases. I would never, ever recommend it for a subject interview. And let me tell you why. Easy enough. How many of you have received telephone calls at home from a telemarketer or somebody that you have had no hesitation in lying to over the phone? We don't even think about it. We just lie. How about social media? Everything on social media is true. Seriously. We lie in those contexts, whereas it's much harder to lie face to face. I don't know who grew up with a dad who always said to him, "You look at me when I'm talking to you." You know, that eye contact, the eyes are the window to the soul. It's harder to lie. The video, there's a video distancing. You got to understand that in person, if you feel that, it's harder to lie to somebody in person. You understand that your cognitive load increases, which puts a greater burden on you, and that burden causes you to exude the verbal and nonverbal indicators of deception. Yeah. Over the phone, comfortable. I can always hang up. So the question though is, and my reason for saying that is we got to get back to face-to-face interviews at some point. If you have managers that say it's fine, we're going to keep doing it this way, you might just well shut your unit down because you're not going to get results and you're just wasting time. But what do we do if we're stuck with a phone interview or a virtual interview of some type? You're right. Whoever said we lose the indicators of deception via nonverbal indicators, that's absolutely true. But we aren't real good at detecting deception through nonverbals. Trained investigators are about 51% accurate on nonverbals alone. Because what we want to do is take the nonverbals with the verbals. We're much better with verbals. So on the virtual, whether it's video or whether it's telephone, what we have to do is really work at the issue of active listening. We got to get ourselves out of the equation, stop thinking about what you're going to say next, and actually listen to what the person is saying, because we're much better at detecting deception via, some of the qualifying words. Well, that's about it. That's to my recollection. Those words are not words we use unless we're trying to couch and give ourselves space. So we got to listen better. And we got to work harder, believe it or not, at establishing rapport, because you're not there where they can see you either to develop that relationship. You are to a certain extent in virtual video interviews, but it's not the same thing. So we got to work harder to establish that relationship, and then we have to work much harder to listen as that interview progresses and not let things go. If there's something they say that you don't understand fully, we got to do more follow-up questions. We're actually going to have to spend more time on the phone or on the video than we would in person, because our certainty of that deception or our certainty of what they're saying is not going to be as good.
Yeah. That's some great tips that I can actually use here for my interview as well. Listening better, helping with follow-up questions. I mean, I think I've done 2 in person. And I have to say they were easier. These Fraud Fact Friday live interviews in person were a bit easier. But definitely an excellent point with the listening part. Because of course I'm looking here on LinkedIn to see who's commenting. I don't want anyone to miss a comment, and so I can relate to that for sure. Which, even does lead me, and I hope we were able to answer your questions. All right, everyone. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to write them here as well. Hello, Melly from Chicago. Thank you for joining again. Nice to see you again. Yeah, and if anyone else has a question, feel free to jump in. We are at the 25-minute mark. So, Mark, if you need to go, let me know. I have a little bit more time if it's okay with you. I have a couple more questions that I prepared. We've got some good participation going on. But coming back to kind of my idea of the Fraud Fact Friday live interview and me being able to learn something from this, you mentioned you provide training not just to fraud investigators and auditors, but also to, for example, HR teams for interviewing job candidates. And in a sense, I mean, companies are also trying to weed out fraudsters. There are people that have defrauded other companies in the past that are now applying to their company. So some people have exaggerated their resumes. So what advice could you provide for orchestrating a successful job interview, like from the employer standpoint? It's a bit of a shift, but I notice you do training in various areas.
Yeah, and it isn't that big of a shift. It's kind of amazing to me. The audience feels it's a big shift. They feel it's a big shift from interviewing in the auditing realm versus the investigation realm. And big shift between criminal investigations and administrative investigations. Big shift between investigations and job interviews. And the shift isn't that big. It really has to do especially in the HR realm. It has to do with how we ask questions. So we want to ask the right question, which is going to elicit more information as to whether it's deceptive or not. You say resumes being incorrect. The most recent study, or having, how did you say it? Inflated?
Exaggerated, yeah.
Over 51% of resumes have material false statements in it. That's terrible.
That's horrible, yeah.
That's 1 out of every 2 you get in there. So you're going to want to ask good questions. We ask a lot of, and I'll just address this through one area of questioning. We talk about a couple different things: assumptive questions and bait questions in interview training across the board. HR people interviewing auditors. We ask a lot of yes/no questions. And you understand how easy it is to lie to a yes/no question. I always ask in classes, I said, who has children here? And you get a lot of hands say, how many of you have asked your children the question, do you have homework tonight? That is the dumbest question on the face of the earth, because they are conditioned to say no. So the question becomes, how do we ask that question? And when I retired, I was picking my son up from middle school almost every day. And it was a joke as to how I was going to ask about it. You know, what subjects do you have homework in tonight? From easiest to hardest, what are the subjects you have homework in? What teacher gave you the most homework? All of those cause you to have to do what? Create or materialize an answer. It isn't just a rote yes, no. It's very hard to detect deception in a yes, no. But when you create that answer, you shouldn't, there's things we're looking for. We're looking for the length of the answer. We're looking for response latency. You know, if I ask you, have you looked at child pornography on your computer today? If you have to go, child pornography, there's a problem with the answer. So we want to ask these narrative-based questions, which we're back to the thing I brought up earlier, the issue of cognitive load. Those questions create cognitive load because I have to create an answer. In the creation of the answer, I have to determine, is David going to accept this answer that I'm giving him? Is this answer somewhat relative, and does it answer the question? All of that stuff causes burdens, and that's where we see the indicators of deception, either verbally or non-verbally, in the way that the question's answered. So for HR people, I say you have to formulate your questions better in order to attempt to determine whether some of these things are missing information or not. That'd be the easiest one. There's lots of other things we talk about with them because they actually have bad questioning techniques, much like journalists do.
Okay.
So we want to get away from those things.
And it shouldn't, and this is where you might make a distinction between interrogation and interview, right? I mean, a job interview shouldn't feel like an interrogation.
It shouldn't, but if you have reason to believe that person sitting across from you is not providing accurate information, and think about it, that happens everywhere. Car dealers,
Yeah.
people selling you a washing machine, the person giving you a quote for mowing your lawn. There's all sorts of places where people don't give us the totality of the information. If that comes up, then I would say if you have to call them out on that or attempt to sift through that, that becomes an interrogation. So does a job interview become an interrogation? Yeah. If you provide material false statements and I have to get to what the truth is, that's where I'm saying addressing people where you have to get to that truth using themes, using rapport, using rationalizations, projections, and minimizations is what the substance of an interrogation.
Very helpful. And I have to say, you're killing it, Mark. People are wanting to know more. You're doing a good job. It's a great interview. Great feedback from Leah, who's going to be in the hot seat herself on June 12th, by the way. Oh, right. It's not a hot seat. We're having fun, right?
Yes.
Another question. Do you have time? I'm sorry. I know I told you. Okay. Another question came in. What do you think about technical support in voice recognition and polygraphs?
I don't have a problem with any of that stuff, but recognize that stuff is all, a polygraph is a separate situation. Most of that stuff is going to benefit ourselves after the interview. The other one that I would bring up and add in with that, I don't know if anybody's ever seen the TV show Lie to Me or the concept of this facial recognition, the Paul Eichmann stuff on those micro expressions and stuff, things like that. Those are valuable things, but where they're most valuable is after the interview. If I video record the interview and then I have the computer establish those things, because to me, micro facial expressions are very difficult to analyze if you're actually listening to the person, unless you're like an incredible multitasker. count me out.
Yeah.
If you can do that, you can do that. It's like eye movement. I don't spend a whole lot of time on eye movement because that's just not my strength. Some people are good at it. So those things are all very useful, but most of the time they're useful after the interview. Here's my take on the interview. I want to get all the information while I'm in the room with you. I want to get you to tell me you lied to me. I want to get you to give me a written statement. I want to have things sewn up before I leave the room. That's my best chance to get that.
Yeah.
So I'll stay in the room as long as I need to get that. Should we use tools that are available to us? Yes. But I think our problem with that is we start relying on those and we don't build the skills that we need internally as an investigator or auditor to get at the truth.
Okay.
Does that kind of cover it for?
Definitely. I think so. Trying to make sure. So so Stanley wrote, what is the biggest booby trap during an interview? I don't know if that's something you've ever covered. It's a funny question. I thought, I don't know.
There's a ton of them. I actually just I just finished 2 blogs, and if you want to see any, they're on LinkedIn. So if you can search me and you hook up with me, you can find these blogs. I just did 2 because I had to break it up because I write too long and people don't have the attention span. So it's called A Baker's Dozens of Common Interviewing Mistakes. So I cover several of those and very candid about some of the ones I suffer with. I would say, to answer that, if I'm catching the tone of his question, I'll tell you my number one from 30 years, and I wish I'd had early good interview training early on to not make this, is handling denials. You got to understand that if you call somebody out for something they're telling you, and they want to lie to you, you're going to have to handle denials. If you expect to walk into the room and because you're charming, they're going to tell you the truth, and they tell you the truth the first time, you got to wonder what's wrong with that person. So you got to work to get this stuff. So my number one would be handling denials, shutting the denials down, because if we allow the denials to get put on the table, then we have to defeat the denial. And I think the easiest is, you're probably a little young for this, but you can remember when you were a child. You don't want you as a child to verbalize a lie. because once somebody verbalizes a lie, they're going to do everything to stick to that lie,
Yeah.
because otherwise
Keeps growing. That
yeah,
lie keeps growing. Yeah.
it keeps growing, and sometimes it gets very bizarre and all the rest.
Yeah.
So if we can keep that lie off the table, not being
Yeah.
verbalized, then we have a much better chance of getting to the truth of the issue. So handling denials would be the one that I think we make the biggest mistakes on, and there's some great tools to keep those from hitting the table. That would be my answer on that one.
Okay. Yeah, and again, when I reshare some of these video clips and things, I'll definitely link back to your profile, so people who are interested, or even in the comments of this video, I'll link them back to your blog so they can read more about that topic as well.
Okay.
So I believe, I apologize if I missed something. Let me see. I did address all of the questions that came in, so that was good to this point. I had one final question for you that I'd like to address. Because we talked about different interview scenarios, but looking at the person, the interviewer themselves, do certain personality types fit to different types of interviews, or can I become an expert in any situation with the right training? Like, I don't think I'd make a very good bad cop, for example, or other people might be of a different opinion. I might not make for a very good good cop, but I mean, just that type of scenario, can somebody interview well in any situation with the right training?
I think with the right training, you can become very good in a lot of situations. I think when I started out, I thought I was the best interviewer for every interview, and that's not true, because frankly, there's some people that you walk into the room and they have an issue with you just because of how you look. You look like their sister's ex-husband. You know,
Yeah.
you have some characteristics that reminds them of a teacher they hated. There's some of those things that you might not be able to get over in an interview room. That's why I said earlier on, if you and I go to do an interview, we're both going to establish rapport. And then if they have a greater commonality with you, then I'm letting you do the interview. We shouldn't think that we have to do every interview, or that it's a weakness to say, I'm going to have somebody else do it. I want to take a diversity of people with me too. I want to take somebody who's not like me. You know, they say that about good leaders. Stop surrounding yourself with little mini yous. You want people around you who are different from you and are as talented as you, so that it gives them that chance when you walk into the interview room. I learned that early on. Myself and my partner went to pitch a person to be a source in the world of international terrorism when I was working for the FBI, and he was much more senior than I, and it was supposed to be his source because this is going to be a great source. 2 hours into the interview, he pulled me aside. We went outside, and he said to me, "You're going to have to pitch him because he won't work with me." So I pitched him, and I ran him for a couple of years, and he was an outstanding source. But my partner had enough sense to realize, if I keep doing this, we're not getting him. And in source development is very much the same as subject type interviews. You know, you got the same stuff going on. So I think we should realize that with good training, the key on the good training thing, and I get this all the time from people that I do training with, it's not so much what I teach you. I'm going to give you tools. I'm going to help you to understand the theory. But what I'm going to do is create a greater confidence in you that's going to make you more confident and more credible in the interview room. And that's what allows you to stay in that room and keep fighting and doing a good job. So I think with good training, you get more comfortable with it. With that comfort comes success. So I say you can get much better at it, but recognize that for every interview, you're not going to be the best person.
Yeah. Okay. So we did it, Mark. We went over the time a little bit that we agreed upon in advance, but thanks for your flexibility.
Absolutely.
And thanks for taking the time to share this knowledge. It was very helpful for me, and based on the comments we're receiving here as well, helpful for the audience. So thank you for your time. It's been great getting to know you, and I'm sure we will be in touch. Any final comments from your side?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. Don't apologize to me for taking my time. I enjoy doing this. So if there's people that are interested, I'm glad to share it. And if there's anything I can do for any of your listeners or people that see this, have additional questions they didn't feel like asking here, reach out to me either on LinkedIn or email me. It might take me a day or two to get back to you, but I'll get back to you.
Perfect. All right, Mark, have a great weekend. Thanks for joining. Don't hang up, don't leave. I'll end the broadcast and we'll have a quick chat afterwards. But thanks again for your time.
Absolutely.
All right.